So good evening, and thank you, Abdullah, for the nice words for introducing me. So before I start talking about Carlo Gesualdo, I would like to make a short disclaimer. Like Abdullah said, I'm a PhD student in biology, so I'm not a musician, I'm not a music historian, so I'm not an expert on this. So this is really a hobby for me, and I'm not going to give you like a super expert scientific talk on this guy. I'm just going to try and share a bit what fascinates me so much about this composer. So, Carlo Gesualdo, probably we should first start and learn a bit about his early life. So he was born in southern Italy in a small town called Gesualdo, it's his family name, which was then in the late 16th century the kingdom of Naples. And he was born into nobility, so his family had actually just been promoted to possess the Duchy of Venosa, so that was like a substantial chunk of southern Italy right here, which his family owned, and so they were called the princes of Venosa. He was a second son, so he was not destined to become the heir to the house, he was actually destined to become a priest. So he was supposed to take the church path, career path. However, he very early on, he dabbled into music. So he was devoted to music really in a very young age, and he started to play the lute. So that's this instrument in this Caravaggio painting here, the guitar and the harpsichord, and he was one of the most accomplished and acclaimed players of his time. And he also, at a very young age, he became acquainted and actually conversant with the most famous composers of Italy. So his life was, actually it was very relaxed. So you see, I mean, he lived in a nice castle and everything was set up. He was going to inherit a lot of money. However, when he was in his mid-20s, his brother died. And that was kind of the end of his early musical career, because now suddenly he was the heir to the house. So he had to keep up the whole line, and he had to rule this Duchy of Venosa. And so that meant he had to move to Naples, which was like the biggest town and like the capital of that region. And it also meant that now his uncle became much more influential in his life. His uncle was a cardinal in Rome, and he was one of the most powerful men actually in Italy at that time, and he started to direct his life a bit more. Being the heir to a house also entailed one very important duty, and that was marrying and producing new heirs and new children. So his family selected his first cousin to marry. So she was called Maria d'Avalos. As I said, his first cousin, and like contemporaries claimed her to be one of the most beautiful women in Italy. I mean, this is I think the only picture that we have of her, and she looks very pious in there. Apparently, she wasn't very pious in real life. At the age of 25, she was already twice widowed, and the chronists were actually saying that her previous husbands had actually died in bed because she had worn them out. So the two of them got married in 1586. And there was a huge feast because they were like the richest family of the region. And for the first 2 years or so, everything was fine, marital bliss. So there's another source saying that for 2 years, they hardly ever left the bedroom, and also produced 2 children. However, Maria at some point probably got dissatisfied, and she took a lover in around 1588, and that was the beginning of quite a catastrophe in their lives. So what happened was that after 2 years, oops, it shouldn't do that already, actually. Anyway, after 2 years, Gesualdo realized that his wife was cheating on him, and in October 1590, he realized, okay, this was Fabrizio Carafa, which was one of the most beautiful men of his time. So. And a cross-dresser, interestingly. So what he did, he knew that on that evening, the two of them would meet. So his wife and Fabrizio Carafa would meet because he had announced that he would go on a hunting trip. But obviously, he was planning to surprise them in flagranti. So he left the house, but he had wooden keys for his own locks made, so like doubles, so that he could re-enter. And sure enough, like after 2 hours, he returned with his set of servants, and he found the two of them in bed in flagranti. And so what happened next is actually, there are very detailed reports about that in the file still available in Naples. But to cut it short, he went in and murdered them very brutally, along with his servants. So he went in and stabbed them to death. I just put like a couple of citations from these reports. So it was saying that like some of the stab wounds from the swords were going into the floor, like through the body, through the bed, into the floor, so very brutally. The whole bed was drenched in blood. The guy got a gunshot to the head, so that bits of brain were oozing out. And it's also reported that Gesualdo went to such a frenzy that he ran out of the room, and he ran back again after she was already stabbed like dozens of times, and continued to slash at her and just screaming all the time, "I don't believe she's dead." And after that was done, after he had murdered his wife and her lover, he had the corpses thrown on the stairs of this palace in Naples. And it is reported that even in death, even although he had actually like stabbed her dozens of times, Maria was still so beautiful that a demented monk passed by during that night and violated her dead corpse. For Gesualdo, however, he was a prince, so he didn't have to fear consequences really. So there was no one persecuted princes. Murdering your wife when she was cheating was actually acceptable at that time in Italy. The only problem was he had to fear the vengeance of the families of the two. So what he did, he fled from Naples back to his hometown in Gesualdo. So you see, like these are images from Gesualdo, and he spent most of his remaining life there. However, there are some more gruesome details to the whole thing. It is reported that of his two children, he was no longer sure whether his younger son was actually his son. So, and he was in this state of total frenzy, and he looked at his son, and it was like a baby of 1, maximum 2 years. And then said, "No, this is not my child. I have to kill him too." And so he had his son put in a cradle, and he had ropes attached to the cradle in this courtyard. And then he commanded some servants to have these ropes being moved so that the cradle would move incessantly and that the child could never go to sleep. And he had a choir stand up there and sing music for a full day and a full night until the child, out of sleep deprivation, finally died. So that's a pretty brutal way of murdering your own child. And but after that, apparently Gesualdo was really hunted by guilt and by what he had done. So this is a painting he commissioned in Gesualdo, in that town, in a church which is still there today. I mean, this is not a very good photograph, but there is none better available. So you see, this is Gesualdo. Somewhere up here is Dona Maria, and this is like Jesus, but obviously it resembles his child, and this guy resembles his uncle, the cardinal. And so what he did for the next, I mean, I'm cutting a bit short, but what he did for the next years was actually, he felt guilty, but out of this real deep feeling of guilt, he started composing music, and music that, in a way, has been completely out of his time, and continues to marvel today's musicians. So this is one of his most famous madrigals. So it's all vocal music, usually for 5 or 6 voices. And you see the Italian lyrics on the left and the English translation on the right. And you see this is, it's usually about death and guilt and suffering. Like almost all his lyrics are about this. And I have also printed the setting to give you an idea, like this is how he set this to music. And I mean, I can't really go into details because I'm also not a super expert on music. As I said, I sing in the choir and I love singing this stuff. But the particular thing about Gesualdo's compositions are that you see he has, like, you see all this sharps and reliefs here. He composed in a very chromatic style, and in a style that was not that was completely out of his time. So not until the 20th century, until Igor Stravinsky actually came up, so in the 1960s, did people really realize they forgot about his music and they only dug it up back then because in the 20th century they realized, okay, this is so very modern and this is so very daring in a way. Aldous Huxley said that Gesualdo completely went into musical no man's land, and for 400 years after him, no one did something remotely comparable, and this is also why no one listened to it, because it was much too complicated and it was much too weird for them. But nowadays, he's one of the like small superstars in choral music. And I did not bring an example of one of his pieces because I think if you're really interested, you can come to me, or we can go to YouTube, or you can search him or look him up on YouTube. But with this, I would like to thank you and just quickly show you this last picture. So this is a 2004 painting by an American artist of Gesualdo, and he recaptures like the different stations of his life. So you see him here. You see this is the murder scene where he murdered his wife. You see this is another episode which is in a Macbethian way when he fled to his castle in Gesualdo, that he had all the trees around his castle cut down because he was afraid of his enemies coming to hunt him. And you also see these two skeletons here, which I reprinted here. So just across the street of this palace in Naples where he murdered his wife, there is a church, which is one of the most famous churches actually in Italy. Apparently, I haven't visited, unfortunately. And in the cellar of that church, you have these two weird skeletons. And there is a local legend that this is a man and a woman, and it's actually the two murdered victims, and an alchemist actually took the bodies and embalmed them. And nowadays, you see them, and you see the vascular tissue and all the blood vessels, and they look pretty scary, I think. And just across the street, they still like survive to the day. Okay, thank you. Popularized in Europe. So, at his time, so his major stuff was published in 1611. At this time, he was actually still quite famous, and like in Italy and also across Italy and beyond Italy. And Monteverdi, for example, like 30, 40 years later, he still said that he was influenced a lot by Gesualdo, but then it was lost. And I think it was rediscovered for the first time in the 1920s when a British composer, I forgot his name though, he wrote a book about Gesualdo and about his life story. So it was more like a novel actually. But then for the first time this myth came back, and then people started, okay, this is really amazing. This is an amazing story. So he actually also composed music, so let's have a look. And then really popular, I think he got from the 1960s when Stravinsky took it up. But I mean, there are movies about him, there are operas about him. 3 years ago, there was an opera premiere here in Zurich for opera which was called Gesualdo. I think you.
There is not at a certain point you're so tired that you get fall asleep.
I think you can, and in particular children. I mean, I think with an adult person it takes like a week of sleep deprivation, but with a child it's probably much faster. And it's also, I mean, there's also a lot of legends around this, so it's not perfectly clear whether he did it like that, but apparently he killed his child. Yeah.
Did he actually, besides doing music, to forget, kind of his sins and so on, or to ask forgiveness? Did he do anything else?
Well,
Because he was a prince, so he could have built churches, for example.
yeah, I mean, he built that church with that. Well, he put that picture in that church. I think he didn't build it. What he did most of the time was actually not forget about it or repent. He indulged in the guilt. So I mean, also the music, it's not really looking for forgiveness, I would say. It's more like celebrating his own pain that came along. So there are a couple of very gruesome stories when, like, he remarried, but he abused his wife. So he beat her until she fled back to her father's and started an incestuous relationship with her brother. And he stayed back and had, so he dabbled with witches. So that's a very funny thing. Like, he had 2 witches at his court who were like doing some sorcery with him all the time, like some alchemy. But he also had 10 to 12 young slaves, so young men, attractive men, who had to beat him with a stick 3 times a day, and while he was on the toilet, actually. So he could only, like, he was enjoying that. You know, like, he ordered them to beat him, and he said only then can he kind of live properly. So it's pretty messed up stuff. Yes.
Was there a change to his relationship to his uncle Jerome during this development?
Well, unsurprisingly not, I would say. I mean, this is the time of the Borgias also, and so on, like, and you know, and the Medici. So this is really, so this intrigue and killing your wife, as I said, was pretty normal if you were rich and famous. So it was okay. It was accepted. And I mean, his uncle was a cardinal, but had a lot of illegitimate children of like by himself, and he was a power person. So he was really himself apparently quite a. Yeah, he didn't stop short of killing people. So.
Do you have any records about influences of this music on popular music, for example?
On popular music, it's hard to say, I would say. So.
Because that sounds really blues. Who's written there?
If you listen to it.
I heard about that, but I don't remember about it.
So I mean, this chromatic thing, he kind of invented it, and then it like. Didn't invent it, but he was really like perfectioning this chromatic style, and then it was forgotten, and other people went there again, like Wagner and Schubert and Schönberg. They went there again, and they did the same thing without knowing about him, really. About popular music, I don't know. I think it has been used in a couple of movies, for sure. And in classical music, I mean, definitely there's a lot of influences, and a lot of composers have said that they have been influenced by his work. But pop music, I don't know. And I mean, if you listen to it, we can listen to it afterwards. It doesn't sound like blues.
I know.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
I heard about something.
Well, I don't know, at least.